They'd say it's best to open any speech with a joke. I don't know any, so we're going to move along. Through childhood and beyond, I've been interested in music, and yet I've never understood it. The creation of it is basically real-life magic as far as I can tell, and it's not for a lack of instruction. Music class was part of the curriculum all through elementary school, including mandatory participation in at least 2 school musicals a year. Our music teacher was even someone who was on a local Christian music record label with an album out and everything. My best friend in junior high attempted to teach me guitar once, but gave up after 1 lesson. As in, he gave up on me learning, not I gave up on wanting to learn. In high school, I visited a friend who was the drummer in the only local band that ever existed in my hometown. He told me to try out his drum set, and very quickly he changed his mind and said I had done the worst drumming he'd ever heard. I dated a girl who was in the high school marching band, and once was allowed to play her trombone, not a euphemism, during a football game, but only succeeded in emptying the spit valve on the back of my friend in front of me, also not a euphemism. Marching band uniforms are surprisingly absorbent. What I'm getting at is that I'm not a musician, and we're all better off because of that. So, childhood interest moved to comic books, and around the same time I discovered sequential art, I decided to experiment with drawing as a hobby. The very first thing I drew was the Velociraptor from a McDonald's collector's cup, and I impressed myself with how good I considered it to be. I decided that when I grew up, I was going to attend Joe Kubert's School of Comic Art, and then move to New York and live in an apartment like Seinfeld and work for Marvel Comics as a penciler. And that was my dream until junior high. My dream until I met other kids who also loved comic books and not only loved to draw, but were way, way better at it than me. My dream until I took my first art class with a teacher who probably believed herself to be being constructive critically, but just made me feel like every project was a failure. My dream that I finally let die my sophomore year of high school when that same junior high art teacher flunked me in Art 2. And so my interest shifted again. The summer before 9th grade was largely spent hanging out with my new best friend Matthew. Matthew was a huge movie nerd who grew up being allowed to watch whatever he wanted. My childhood was the opposite. So I introduced him to alternative Christian music that he mostly made fun of, and he introduced me to Halloween, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and The Toxic Avenger. We spent most of that summer riding our bikes to the video store and back, renting stacks of VHS. That summer, I also began dating my first serious girlfriend. This naturally led to having my heart broken for the first time about 7 months later. I chose to console myself by renting some movies. That Valentine's night, Joe Dante's masterpiece, The Burbs, changed my life. Despite my high school heartache and early signs of later diagnosed major depression, The Burbs completely transported me with the hijinks and hilarity of Tom Hanks and his paranoid neighbors. For those 90 minutes or so, I completely forgot about my sadness and teenage ennui. That was the night I truly understood the power of film as an immersive medium. Despite this new passion for movies, I still hadn't considered filmmaking as an interest. That idea didn't really come about until after I learned what video editing was. One day in English class, we were assigned the task of splitting into groups and filming our own version of a scene from To Kill a Mockingbird. Well, nobody really had any idea on how to write a script, and we weren't super keen on memorization, so what we settled on was to pantomime the action while an off-screen narrator read the corresponding scene directly from the book. Everything went super easy, and I took the tape home to discover part of what we shot was garbled because we used a really worn-out tape. Still being lazy, we only wanted to reshoot the missing scenes, and it was left to me to figure out how to put the new footage in the right place with the old footage. Remembering how my dad had once made a copy of a home video by connecting the camcorders to the VCR, like a second VCR, and pressing record and play on the correct devices, I successfully edited my first film. We received a good grade and a little note of praise because of our use of editing, rather than the standard high school video technique of the time of setting up the camera on a tripod and acting everything out like a play. And that was the germ that got me into the world of filmmaking. Once that was combined with reading Lloyd Kaufman's book, everything I needed to know about filmmaking I learned by making The Toxic Avenger, I knew what I wanted to do to fill the void left by the death of my previous dream of being a comic book artist. Throughout this rambling mess of a story, I've mentioned a couple of times that I've allowed my dreams or aspirations to wither and die. Some for good reason, like my interest in music, and some because I allowed external pressures to influence me, like with the art teacher who failed me in high school. For a little while, in 4th grade, I really wanted to be a stand-up comedian. Another inspiration to young me was Jerry Seinfeld. That dream, too, died tragically and publicly when I chose to try to do a stand-up bit for the school talent show, and I only had one joke, which I had gotten out of a joke book, and an audience member ruined it by shouting out the punchline before I could. Like, who the fuck does that to a clearly nervous child holding a microphone for the first time in their life? Like those dreams before, my hope of ever accomplishing anything as a filmmaker has waned, and I've mostly come to terms with being a former filmmaker. It sucks, and it hurts to write those words, and it hurts again to say them out loud, but that's where I am right now. But it's not a loss, because all these years of dreams, inspirations, evolving interest, and accumulation of skills have taught me to keep moving to the next thing. When I first started to feel like I was done as a filmmaker, I looked around me and saw the action figure collection my wife and I had started to attain, and I was reminded of one day, long ago as a child, when I was sitting in my room with my action figures and decided to try and set them up in a way that recreated the artwork on a comic book cover. And so, like how my interest in drawing was born from imitating the art around me, another seed was planted, because once I had everything set up, I thought I should take a picture of what I had done. The picture was a blurry mess, but it is still technically my first action figure photo. Taking my interest in photography that began when I became the high school yearbook photographer my freshman year, and combining it with my lighting and scene setting skills learned as a filmmaker, I took up an interest in action figure photography, an art form that I happily still practice in and see being my primary artistic interest for the near future. It may not be a career, but it's a creative outlet that helps keep me sane. Likewise, those skills and contacts acquired as an indie filmmaker have given me the confidence to do things like found 2 film festivals and put on solo art shows. So, whatever you're doing, don't give up, evolve, move forward, and keep making art.